Welcome to another edition of Politics Done Right. I'm here with, once again, Greg Palast. Greg, how are you doing today?
Pretty good in the lockdown. I'm in Los Angeles, so I'm under
Official
law here.
Well,
Basically.
I have a question for you, first of all, Greg.
Mm-hmm.
I want to show the audience the video that you last put out. Check this out, guys.
Leave the area or I'm gonna hit you with a 40 mil.
Press. Why are you here?
No justice, no peace, no righteous police. That's why.
Okay. This is Greg Palast in Los Angeles reporting where there have been police cars on fire. We're right in front of the police station in downtown Los Angeles. There's a curfew which is taking effect in 1 minute, and there have been 500 arrests so far.
Okay, Greg, what nerve you had to go out there downtown and what kind of nerve was it that made you believe you could be downtown? What are you that allowed you to do that?
Partly it was maybe my journalist stupidity, not intelligence, looking for trouble, even though it wasn't looking for me. And I have to say that this is not a small thing. I have my goddaughter living with me, and she is African Swiss. And, and suddenly she said, I have black skin. Do I have to worry? And suddenly I have this young woman living in my household and I have to worry about her well-being. So I said, okay, let's go out and see what's going on. So she actually insisted I do the story. So give her, it was her decision to be courageous. But then she was, I must admit, she was reasonably scared. And so what happened was we have martial law, basically. Well, right now we have the National Guard in the streets right near me, M16s, the whole thing, but I'm less worried about the National Guard despite their weapons than the LA police, who have a very, very long history of being of ultra violence, and especially aimed at people of color. So yeah, I was concerned. In fact, my book, I have a book coming out, as you know, called How Trump Stole 2020. And in the middle of that book, and this is important too to understand why I went out there, in the middle of that book is a 48-page comic book. I say, well, what are you doing with this 48-page comic book? One, to make my book entertaining, because the last one where I had a comic book hit the New York Times bestseller list, so we intend to do it again. But most important is that the comic book is written by a guy named Ted Rall. He was the LA Times cartoonist and columnist who would lampoon the LAPD's brutality against young Black and Hispanic residents of Los Angeles. And because of his going after the cops in the LA Times, the police demanded that the LA Times fire him. We have the internal records, by the way, that we investigated this. The internal records show that the chief of police himself demanded the firing of this journalist. So I then hired him to produce the comic book for How Trump Stole 2020. You have to understand the LAPD, despite the image that Los Angeles is laid back and progressive and cool and multiracial, not the LAPD. They are basically a leftover slave patrol, and they're brutal. And if a journalist says a damn word about the LAPD, they come after you. And they come after it. So it was almost like I can't resist that challenge.
Now, it seemed from the video that I saw, it seemed like you almost got shot.
Yes. Well,
explain.
So what happened was I was near the LA police headquarters. It was a few minutes after the 8 p.m. curfew, so anyone on the street is violating the law. There were mass demonstrations, but with so many police all over, the demonstrators trying to get towards the police department of protest couldn't get there. Only about 6 kids were there. It was about 8:39. Anyway, so there are about 6 Black Lives Matters protesters. I know because you'll see in the little film that you've shown that these, they're saying, why? I said, why are you here? Black Lives, because Black Lives Matter. It's like, and so you could see these are hardly threatening kids. They were just kind of standing around, kind of lost, wondering what to do now. And these cops, I mean, you're talking hundreds of cops, but in the front phalanx of about a dozen, in the very front middle, their obvious leader pulls up and says, I'm 40 up, 40 millimeter up. That's a bullet. That's saying he's loading a bullet. And then he says, I'm going to put a 40 in you, talking to me and the demonstrators, the protesters. They're only about, 15, 18 feet away. He's going to put a bullet in us. He's going to shoot. So he said a 40, I'm going to put a 40 in you. Now there's 3 choices for a 40. I happen to know these weird things. Number 1 is a 40 millimeter tear gas canister. Well, another reporter, Ruben Salazar, was killed by the LA police when they fired a tear gas canister into his head at close range.
I remember that.
So Ruben Salazar was murdered basically by the LA police with a tear gas canister. So I don't find those benign. The second is that the LA police are issued 40 caliber ammunition, semi-hollow. This is called an FBI load, and it'll rip you to pieces. And the third thing is that the LA Times admitted to the Wall Street Journal that they were using 40 millimeter bullets that are rubber encased. So they are, quote, less lethal. I don't know what less lethal is. If there's something like less dead, lethal means it kills you. So is there a less dead way to die? I don't know. But getting hit by a 40, these things, can go through a Humvee door. So now I'm not just so you understand, I'm not like I'm not playing Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'm not an action hero. I'm not a brave guy. But in a tough situation, I do tend to think very fast. And when he was threatening to fire at these kids, whether it's a tear gas shell, a 40 millimeter bullet, a 40, I don't care, a 40 caliber bullet, whatever it was going to be nasty. And so instead of running away, which would just give them my backside as a target, I decided to kind of not run, but go right at the cops, right to them, right into the guns, with holding up my press pass, screaming, press, press, press. Now, I luckily, some people say, well, if I say press, 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 that makes me an extra target for these Trumpites, right, in blue. But this guy, I think, was worried because we were also filming. So he said, oh, okay, I didn't see that. As if I didn't have a press badge, it was okay to shoot me.
Actually, that's probably what it meant. And maybe if you also were a black CNN broadcaster, you would have been arrested as well.
Well, that's the issue. And I've had this. I work, I have an assistant producer, the hip hop artist, Jevin Lamar. And, we've had these discussions about being careful with the LAPD. And, well, obviously all over America. And then we have a second film. I don't know if you have a chance to show that.
Greg, one of your correspondents in Minneapolis, I think, interviewed one of the eyewitnesses to George Floyd's death. Is that correct?
That's correct. In fact, we have a clip of that. And I don't know, if it doesn't break your heart, you don't have a heart.
Well, guys, take a look at this. This is sad.
I see the officer at the door, police called Mr. Floyd, and they was talking. After that, I watched the police officer handcuff Mr. Floyd and take him over to the squad car. And as Mr. Floyd was on the ground, I kept telling the officer, bro, get your foot off his neck because he's stopped breathing, he's gonna die. And the officer refused to get his foot off of Mr. Floyd's neck. And in the meantime, that's what happened, why Mr. Floyd died. If the officer just had to listen to me for that 1 minute, we wouldn't have all these problems going on in our state right now, Minnesota. Yeah. But by the officer taking it on not to take your foot off Mr. Floyd's neck, this is consequence everybody got to pay, including me. Watch a man die and watching me right now waking up, the first thing I hear is Mr. Floyd is saying, "Mom, they killed him in the street." And I lost my mom 2 years ago. It's devastated and it hurts.
So what you just saw is, I mean, there's not much to add. The cop, forget all the stories, you know, the cop didn't know what was happening or whatever. 8 minutes, and there was this man standing next to him. There's a crowd screaming, taking pictures, and there's a man standing next to him, this witness that we saw, saying, he can't breathe, he's going to die. And he said, I watched this man die. You know, this is, but, you know, again, it's not like it's new business. I grew up in Los Angeles. LA riots happened after a man named Detweiler, I remember, was shot, gunned down by the police because he was taking his wife to the hospital. She was pregnant and about to give birth. And so he flagged, you know, he was speeding, of course, but he flagged down a cop, and rather than help him out, they just gunned him down.
Wow.
I remember, you know, the Rodney King riots of
that.
Now, you know what? People say, oh, I remember when Rodney King happened, and unfortunately, some of my white friends said, oh, well, you know, this is an unusual situation. No, it's not. What was unusual was one of the very first times. This is before cell phones, but the guy had one of those little. For the first time, we had little home video.
8mm camera, yeah.
And so the guy had a little home camera and videoed the just brutal beating of a handcuffed black man on the ground. And this is an endless story. And it's got to stop. And it goes back to some of the issues that I work on as a journalist. Most of my time as a journalist is spent on uncovering ways that they steal your vote, which is why I wrote How Trump Stole 2020. And it goes together. You have to understand, when you have unelected, like you have an unelected president, as I prove in the book, Trump was not elected in 2016. He was elected, but by basically massive vote thievery. It's real simple, okay? And he's trying to pull it off again. If you have a president who's not elected, he's not accountable to the electorate. He's accountable to his base, which helps him steal the election. We saw with George Bush, if you remember, and I'm the journalist, and it's in my book too. I'm the journalist who uncovered for The Guardian that Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush back in 2000, for people old enough to remember, they removed tens of thousands of black people from the voter rolls. I uncovered that. They called them felons who weren't allowed at the time to vote in Florida if you have a felony record. And exactly zero were felons, exactly zero. So what's happened is that led to George Bush being president. Well, once he got elected president by stealing Florida, he could do what he wants. He wasn't responsible to the electorate. So we end up in the war in Iraq. Believe me, if you have elected presidents that feel that they have to go back to the electorate, you don't have massive mayhem in our streets or on this planet.
There are several reasons for the dehumanization of black people, people of color, and black men specifically. And you're absolutely correct that voting plays a part. Look at Florida. How many people are taken off the roll? And now that they passed the law that says a felon who has come back into society, paid his due, should be able to vote again. Isn't that what's going on there, where they're still trying in the court system? They've just lost a battle, I think, in one of the upper courts, but they're still trying to do the same thing.
Okay, let me explain. In Florida, until last year, if you had a felony record, you couldn't vote. That is, if you had a felony record in Florida. And then overwhelmingly, like 2-1, including the majority of Republicans, voted to repeal one of the last of the Jim Crow laws, because the Ku Klux Klan literally wrote that law for the state of Florida and other southern states. Other states have gotten rid of this. In almost any state. By the way, if you're listening and you do have a felony record, in almost every state you can vote if you've served your time, including probation, supervision, etc. That's important to know, because we have 9 million people out there who are entitled to vote but think that they can't. If you have a felony record in almost every state in America, you can vote. Just make sure that you've done your supervision also as well. But in the state of Florida, people voted, say, well, let's join the rest of America and say, once you've served your time, you become your citizen again. But then the Republican state legislature, realizing this was going to bring in 1 million people, by the way, 88% Democrats. Doesn't matter whether you're black or white or red or brown or green. If you go to prison, you come out a Democrat. We'll talk about that. But okay, so they realized, oh my God, we're going to have 1 million Democrats. So they passed a law saying, well, you have to pay all your fines and court fees. Now, understand, Egberto, you had a conviction 20 years ago. And in the old days, you were a kid and you got had a joint in your pocket. And of course, it's Florida. You're black. You get a felony record. Well, you can't find the courts. Neither you nor the courts can even find what your court fees were or something like that, or these old fees. There's not even records to figure out how to clear it. So finally, an appeals court said, look, this is just a dumb, cheap trick to prevent the public will, which is to let people vote once they've served their time. So they basically, a court said this is baloney, but they're still dragging their feet. Basically, they're trying to drag their feet past November. And understand, here's one of the things when you get again into race, okay? When I did the investigation in 2000, found that the election was stolen by calling black men felons. Now, you have to understand, not one, it was 0 were ex-cons who couldn't vote in Florida. 0, none, including like Willie Steen, a guy that I met. He was an orderly at a hospital. He'd been a Gulf War veteran. He took his 5-year-old son to show him American voting. Look what we can vote now as black people. Look what Martin Luther King did for us. And he goes in, they say, you can't vote. He's in front of his 5-year-old kid. They say, you're a felon. He says, what? I have a traffic ticket. And the problem is that even the Democratic Party would not defend these voters because they say, well, we can't defend felons. First of all, they're not felons. Even if they were, they're Americans. And their vote should be their vote. But in this case, they were wrongly removed. But if you accuse a young black man of being a felon, he's convicted. In the voter's mind, in the official's mind, a young black man, forget it. They say he has a felony record and he complains. Look out, kid. We're going to throw you back in the slammer.
Right.
This is the problem.
Well, I mean, and that is sad. Well, look, Greg, as usual, it's always my pleasure to speak to you. I'm glad that you went out there and that you ended safely outside of LA. Good job in LA. I think people are going to enjoy that little snippet there. And as far as that interview in Minneapolis, there's not a lot of folks getting to speak to those particular people. So, I mean, thank you for bringing that to us here at Politics Done Right. Before I go, I always ask everybody the same question, and that is there something you would like me to ask you that I didn't ask you?
Yes. Why should we support Egberto Willies and his program? I am joining your Patreon, and I hope that everyone listening does the same, because only this man has the courage to bring me through the electronic Berlin Wall here. I mean, as he mentioned, I work for The Guardian. That's a British paper. Why is this American boy writing for British papers and working for British television? And the answer is because I'm locked out in my own country. They don't want to hear this news about endemic racism, the continuation of slavery in another form, which is to take away your votes and your rights, and as we now know, your life too. So I hope people will. So there you go. That's not a question. I gave a speech. If you
I
don't
love that. Thank you so kindly, Greg. And you have a good one. You keep up doing the good work. You will always have at home at Politics Done Right, because you know what? You know, our audience love that we just give you the straight info and nothing more. So thank you so kindly, Greg. You have a wonderful day.
You too. See you at gregpalast.com.
I'm Egberto Willies, host of Politics Done Right, an independent news program. I post several news videos of interest every day. I ask you so kindly to subscribe to my channel, and please leave me some comments. Thank you very much.